There is a genetic code of the soul, a cosmic fingerprint that you have carried since your first breath. I'm not talking about destiny, I'm talking about architecture. Carl Jung, the man who dared to map the unconscious, discovered that this internal architecture, your fears, your gifts, your shadow, and your light had a perfect mirror in the map of the sky at the moment you were born. He understood that astrology was not about predicting the future, but about revealing the eternal pattern that lives within you. What you are about to discover is not superstition. It is humanity's oldest and most profound psychology, a truth that modern science has chosen to forget, but that your soul has never ceased to know. Before we dive into this revelation, I need you to understand the nature of this journey. This is not a video to be watched passively. It is a mirror. Every word is designed to echo in the forgotten chambers of your own psyche. If you are only seeking superficial information, this is not the place for you. But if you feel a calling, a hunger for a deeper meaning, then make a pact now. Subscribing to this channel is not just clicking a button. It is sealing a commitment to your own depth. It is declaring that you are ready to face the truths that most prefer to ignore. Leaving a like is your symbolic act of lighting a candle on this path, acknowledging the value of this exploration. And leaving a comment with the word awakening is your first active step. Your affirmation that you are here not as a spectator, but as a participant in your own great work. Do this now and prepare to never look at the sky or yourself in the same way again. In the early 20th century, the intellectual world was intoxicated with materialism. The mind, for the dominant Freudian psychoanalysis, was a biological mechanism, a tangle of repressed sexual impulses and childhood traumas confined to the brain. Reality was that which could be weighed, measured, and dissected. In this context, Carl Jung's decision to turn to astrology was not a mere academic whim. It was an act of intellectual heresy, a radical betrayal of the spirit of his time. To understand the depth of his vision, we must first understand the monumental courage it required. Jung risked his reputation, the respect of his peers, and the legacy of his work by exploring a system his contemporaries considered a superstitious relic. Why? Because he had found a fundamental flaw in the psychology of his era. It had no room for the soul, for meaning, for mystery. He realized that the human psyche is not a closed system, but an open field that resonates with the universe. In his studies of mythology, religion, and alchemy, he discovered universal patterns, symbols that repeated across all cultures and eras. These were the archetypes, the primordial structures of the collective unconscious. And to his surprise, he found that the oldest and most complete system for describing the dynamics of these archetypes was not in modern psychology, but in ancient astrology. He did not see the planets as chunks of rock exerting a gravitational force on human destiny, but as living symbols, personifications of the inner gods, the archetypal forces that move us. To look at the stars, for Jung, was a way of looking at an amplified diagram of the psyche itself. It was to recognize that the human drama, with its conflicts, loves, and tragedies, was not an isolated event, but the echo of a larger cosmic pattern. He dared to ask, what if reality is not just a chain of cause and effect, but also a web of meaning and correspondence? This forbidden question opened a door that science had locked, revealing a universe where the psyche and the cosmos are not separate, but are reflections of each other in an eternal mirror. The word coincidence is one of the rational ego's most effective defense mechanisms. It allows us to dismiss the mysterious, categorize the inexplicable, and maintain the illusion of an orderly and predictable universe. Jung gave us a more honest and infinitely more powerful word, synchronicity. He defined it as a causal connecting principle, a link that unites events not by cause and effect, but by meaning. It is the invisible seam that binds the fabric of reality, connecting your inner world with the outer universe. It is not about one event causing another, but about two or more events mirroring the same archetypal pattern at a given moment. Think of Jung's own classic example. A patient, trapped in extreme rationalism, was telling him a dream about a golden scarab. At the exact moment she described the symbol, a real beetle, very similar to the scarab, tapped against the office window. To the causal mind, a statistical fluke. To Jung, a synchronistic event, the archetype of renewal and transformation symbolized by the scarab. was trying to break through the patient's rational defenses, manifesting simultaneously in her dream inner world and in the physical world outer. Synchronicity reveals that we live in a participatory universe, where consciousness is not separate from the world, but is interwoven with it. It is the evidence that psyche and matter are two aspects of the same unified reality. Astrology, within this view, is the largest and oldest system of synchronicity documented by humanity. The astral chart does not cause someone's personality. Instead, the quality of the time in which a person is born, symbolized by the planetary configuration, corresponds meaningfully to their psychic structure. As above, so below. The pattern is the same. Understanding this changes everything. The events of your life cease to be a random succession of accidents. They become messages, symbols pointing to an inner process, an unexpected encounter, a painful loss, an opportunity that arises out of nowhere. All can be seen as a synchronistic manifestation, an invitation from the self for you to grow, heal, and become more whole. To live in tune with synchronicity is to live in a continuous dialogue with the universe, where every event, no matter how trivial it may seem, is charged with the potential for profound meaning. Imagine being able to see an X-ray of your psyche, a diagram that reveals not diseases, but potentials, not fractures, but dynamic tensions that contain the seed of your greatest growth. This is the function of astrology when it is rescued from its trivialization as a fortune-telling method and understood as Jung saw it, the oldest and most comprehensive form of psychology. For millennia, before the invention of terms like ego, unconscious, or complex, humanity used the language of planets and signs to describe the fundamental energies that operate within the human being. The astral chart is, therefore, a symbolic diagnosis of the soul. It is a map of your personal equation, showing the initial configuration of the archetypal forces with which you were born. The sun is not just a star, it is the symbol of your core identity, the archetype of the hero on their journey. The moon is not a satellite, it is the representation of your emotional world, your anima or animus, your personal unconscious. Mercury represents your thinking function, logos. Venus, your capacity to relate, eros. Mars, your impulse for action, the warrior. Saturn is not a malevolent planet, but the symbol of the reality principle, the archetype of the old wise man who imposes limits on us so that we can build a solid structure. The tensions in the chart, the squares and oppositions that popular astrology so fears, are, in the Jungian view, the points of greatest potential. They are the sites of inner conflict, the psychic complexes where energy is blocked. And it is precisely by working on these points, consciously, that the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, happens. Astrology becomes a therapeutic tool of immense power. It gives a name to our inner demons, validates our contradictions, and shows us that our most personal struggles are, in fact, expressions of universal archetypal dramas. It frees us from shame and isolation, revealing that the tension between our desire for security, moon, and our need for freedom, Uranus, is not a personal flaw, but a cosmic dance stage within our own soul. To understand Jung's vision, one must abandon the idea that planets are external forces that manipulate us. Instead, we must see them as the faces, the names, the personifications that humanity has given to the most powerful and autonomous psychic forces that live within us, the archetypes. These are not learned ideas, but inherited patterns of instinct and perception, deposited in the collective unconscious through countless generations of human experience. They are the gods that govern our inner world. When we speak of Mars, we speak not of a red rock, but of blind fury, the warrior's courage, raw sexual desire, the will to assert oneself. This warrior archetype exists in every one of us. To deny it leads to passivity or passive aggression. To integrate it consciously gives us assertiveness and courage. Venus is the archetype of the lover, the force that impels us to seek union, harmony, beauty, and relationship. She lives in our appreciation for art, in our desire to love and be loved. To repress her leads to isolation and bitterness. To honor her connects us with the joy of life. Saturn is the great teacher, the archetype of the old wise man or the critical father. He is the voice of discipline, responsibility, time, and mortality. To fear him makes us rigid and fearful, Learning to work with him gives us mastery, structure, and wisdom. Jupiter is the benevolent king, the archetype of expansion, faith, the search for meaning, and generosity. An inflated Jupiter leads to arrogance and excess. An integrated Jupiter gives us optimism and a broad view of life. The outer planets, discovered more recently, symbolize transpersonal forces from the deep collective unconscious. Uranus is the revolutionary, the awakener, the sudden force of change and liberation. Neptune is the mystic, the dreamer, who dissolves the boundaries of the ego and connects us with the ocean of the whole. Pluto is the lord of the underworld, the transformer, the force of death and rebirth, which drags us into the depths so that we may emerge purified. The astral chart shows how these gods are arranged in your psyche. Are they in harmony or at war? Which one dominates and which has been exiled to the shadow? The journey of life, from this perspective, is a process of building an internal round table, where each of these gods has a seat and a voice, transforming the chaos of a warring pantheon into a royal court that serves a higher purpose, the self. The ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without, is the cornerstone of Jung's view of the cosmos. He did not interpret it literally, but psychologically. The above, the sky. The macrocosm is not the cause of the below, the human being, the microcosm. Instead, both are manifestations of the same underlying pattern. Of the same archetypal matrix, the outer universe functions as a gigantic screen onto which humanity projects the structure of its own unconscious psyche. Projection is a fundamental psychological mechanism we attribute to external objects, or people, qualities, traits, and energies that are, in fact, our own, but which we do not recognize in ourselves. Humanity, in its infancy, projected its most powerful psychic contents onto the points of light that moved in the night sky. The overwhelming emotions, the uncontrollable impulses, the profound intuitions, all of this was too large and numinous to be contained within the fragile human ego. So, they were seen out there in the planets. The pantheon of gods and goddesses associated with the planets is a perfect catalog of archetypal forces. The story of Zeus Jupiter, with his expansiveness and infidelities, is the story of the archetype of expansion when uncontained. The story of Cronus Saturn devouring his children is the myth of the principle of limitation and of time that consumes all it creates. By creating these myths and observing the heavens, our ancestors were not being primitive. They were doing profound psychology. They were creating a symbolic language to dialogue with their own unconscious. Astrology is the coded and systematized result of millennia of this projective process. This is why it works. When an astrologer reads a chart, they are, in fact, reading a symbol of the psychic structure that was projected onto the sky. They are using this external screen to help the individual withdraw their projections and recognize that the gods are not out there, but in here. It is a process of demythologizing the cosmos and remythologizing the psyche. The ultimate goal is reintegration. It is to understand that the battle between Mars and Saturn in your chart is not an astrological curse, but a reflection of your internal conflict between the impulse to act and the fear of limitation. Astrology, therefore, becomes the way back home, the tool that allows us to gather the fragments of our soul that we have scattered across the universe and recognize them as parts of ourselves. The greatest distortion of astrology is the idea that it reveals a fixed destiny, an immutable sentence written in the stars. For Jungian psychology, this view is not only false but psychologically harmful, as it robs the individual of their responsibility and their power to transform. In Jung's perspective, the astral chart is not a script of what will happen, but a diagram of the potential with which you were born. It is the map for your journey of individuation. Individuation is Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming an individual, that is, a unified and indivisible whole, in which all parts of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, are integrated around a new center, the self. The birth chart shows the initial ingredients. The sun shows the direction of your heroic journey, the potential for consciousness you came to develop. The moon reveals your fundamental needs and your emotional starting point. The position of Saturn indicates where you will encounter your greatest fears and, consequently, where you can build your greatest mastery through discipline and effort. The challenging aspect squares oppositions are the most crucial for individuation. They are not bad luck. They are the engines of your evolution. A square between Venus and Pluto, for example, does not condemn you to destructive relationships. It points to a fundamental conflict between the archetype of love Venus and that of power and transformation Pluto. The task of individuation here is to learn to relate authentically without falling into power games, to experience the intensity of love without becoming possessive or being destroyed by it. It is a call for a profound transformation in the way of loving. Each planetary transit, the continuous movement of the planets in relation to your natal chart, is not an external event that causes something in your life. It is the activation of a potential that already exists in your chart. A transit of Pluto over your natal moon is an invitation, often painful and coercive from the self, for you to dive into the depths of your emotional world, bringing to light old traumas, family patterns, and attachments so they can be purified and transformed. Destiny, therefore, is not what happens to you, but what you become by responding to the calls of your chart. The choice is always yours. You can live the archetypes unconsciously, being a puppet of your impulses and complexes, or you can engage with them consciously, transforming tensions into creative strength and challenges into wisdom. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is one of the most important and misunderstood archetypes. It is the repository of everything we reject in ourselves, everything we consider unacceptable to our conscious personality, the persona. It contains not only negative traits, anger, envy, selfishness, but also positive potentials that we do not allow ourselves to express: creativity, assertiveness, sexuality. The journey towards wholeness, individuation, fundamentally depends on the confrontation and integration of the shadow. Astrology offers an extraordinarily precise map for identifying our personal shadow. Certain planets and placements in the astral chart point directly to the energies we tend to repress and project onto others. Pluto, the ruler of the underworld, is the primary significator of the shadow. Wherever Pluto is in your chart, it indicates the area of life where you will encounter issues of power, control, obsession, and compulsive transformation. It is where your demons reside, but also where your greatest power of regeneration is hidden. Saturn, with its restrictive nature, often points to deep fears and insecurities that form a crucial part of our shadow. The house that Saturn occupies can reveal the area of life where we feel inadequate and therefore tend to be overly rigid, critical, or defensive. The 12th house is traditionally called the house of the unconscious, of karma, and of self-undoing. Astrologically, it represents the psychic material that lies just below the threshold of consciousness, functioning as a major portal to the personal and collective shadow. Planets in the 12th house are energies that we have difficulty recognizing and owning, making them perfect candidates to be projected or to sabotage us from behind the curtains. Difficult aspects, such as squares and oppositions, especially involving planets like Mars, Saturn, or Pluto, describe the internal conflicts that generate and feed the shadow. The work is painful but essential. Instead of judging and repressing these difficult energies, we need to ask, what does this anger Mars want? What is the need behind this fear Saturn? What truth is this obsessive behavior Pluto trying to show me? By doing this, we begin the alchemical process of turning lead into gold. We integrate the shadow, withdraw our projections from the world, and become more whole, authentic, and paradoxically more compassionate. As we recognize in ourselves the darkness we so readily condemn in others, our modern society operates under the tyranny of chronos, quantitative time. It is the time of the clock, linear, homogeneous, where every second is equal to the last. We measure life in hours, days, and years, focused on productivity and efficiency. However, the ancients, and Jung with them, knew of the existence of another dimension of time, kairos. Kairos is qualitative time, the opportune moment, the right season for a particular action or event. In kairos, not all moments are equal. There are times to plant and times to harvest, times to begin and times to end, moments of deep introspection and moments of extroverted expansion. Life, in its essence, is not lived in chronos, but in kairos. Astrology is, fundamentally, the study of kairos. It is a map of the quality of time, Each planetary configuration in the sky describes not just an astronomical position, but the archetypal quality of that specific moment. To be born under a Sun-Saturn conjunction, for example, means to be born in a moment kairos whose quality was of seriousness, structure, responsibility, and the potential for mastery through difficulty. This quality of the birth moment imprints itself on the newborn's psyche, not causally, but synchronistically. It is as if the soul chooses to incarnate at the exact moment whose cosmic music corresponds to its own inner song. Astrological transits are the manifestation of kairos in our lives. A transit of Uranus does not cause a revolution in our life. It indicates that we are passing through a period of time kairos whose quality is of liberation, breaking patterns, and sudden change. If we are aligned with this energy, the change can be exciting and freeing. If we resist, trying to cling to old structures, the change may manifest as a shocking and destructive external event that forces us to change. Understanding this distinction frees us from the anxiety of making things happen all the time. It teaches us to feel the flow of life, to recognize the quality of each moment. There are times to force action, when Mars is active, and times to wait patiently, when Saturn dominates. There are seasons for dreaming, Neptune, and seasons for reaping the fruits of labor, Jupiter. Living according to kairos is an art. It is the art of aligning our actions with the flow of the universe, of acting at the opportune moment, of respecting the cycles of contraction and expansion. Astrology, in this sense, is the musical score that helps us dance in harmony with the music of time. The modern scientific mind was built on the pillar of causality. Every effect has a cause. This worldview has been incredibly successful in giving us control over the material world, to build technologies and cure diseases. However, Jung argued that this obsession with causality has left us psychologically impoverished, as it has nothing to say about meaning, purpose, or beauty. Science can explain how a rose grows, but it cannot explain the meaning of the rose to a lover. Jung's rebellion, therefore, was not against science, but against scientism, the belief that causality is the only principle governing reality. The introduction of the concept of synchronicity was his direct attack on this fortress. He proposed that reality is held together not only by chains of cause and effect, but also by webs of meaning. Astrology was his primary body of evidence for this bold claim. It is impossible to prove a causal link between the planet Mars and an act of aggression. The distance is too great. The known physical forces are negligible. The skeptic stops here and dismisses it all as nonsense. But Jung went a step further. He said, what if we are asking the wrong question? What if there is no causal link, but rather a symbolic correspondence, a resonance of meaning? In this view, reality is fundamentally symbolic. A symbol, for Jung, is not just a sign that points to something known. It is the best possible expression for something that is essentially unknown, that transcends rational understanding. The planets, the archetypes, the events of our lives all are symbols that point to a deeper reality, the objective psyche or the collective unconscious. Astrology works because the universe and the psyche speak the same language, the language of symbols. When an astrologer interprets the moon in Scorpio, they are reading a complex symbol that speaks of deep emotions, the need for transformative intimacy, the fear of betrayal, and the power of emotional healing. This interpretation resonates with the individual, not because a distant moon is forcing them to be that way, but because they recognize the truth of the symbol within their own experience. This perspective invites us to live differently. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? A causal question, we can begin to ask, what does this mean for me? A symbolic question. This shift in perspective is the difference between being a victim of random events and being the protagonist of a meaningful journey. In the end, the entire complex structure of Jungian astrology comes down to a single, powerful application to serve as the map for your personal hero's journey. This concept, popularized by Joseph Campbell but with deep roots in Jung's thought, describes the universal pattern of adventure, ordeal, and return that forms the basis of all of humanity's great myths and of each individual's journey. Toward individuation, your astral chart is the unique script of your personal legend. The sun is the hero, your conscious ego, the protagonist of the story. The position of your sun by sign and house reveals the nature of your quest, and the battlefield where your identity will be forged. The hero's journey begins with a call to adventure, often indicated by a significant planetary transit like Uranus or Pluto, that disrupts your ordinary world. The moon represents the hero's inner world, their origins, their security, and the emotions they must learn to master. Saturn often represents the threshold guardian or the ordeals the hero must face. The houses and planets that Saturn aspects show where you will find your greatest challenges, which, once overcome, will become your greatest sources of strength and wisdom. Jupiter can symbolize the mentor or the divine boon, the unexpected help and expansion of consciousness the hero receives. After passing a test, Mercury is the magic weapon or insight the hero acquires, the ability to use mind and communication to navigate challenges. The confrontation with the shadow, symbolized by Pluto and the 12th house, is the dive into the belly of the whale, the descent into the underworld where the hero must face their greatest fear, their inner dragon. It is here that symbolic death and rebirth occur. The ultimate goal of the journey is not to slay the dragon, but to integrate its power, rescuing the treasure, which is a new level of consciousness, a connection with the self. Viewed this way, your astral chart ceases to be an object of intellectual curiosity and becomes a living, breathing guide. It invites you to actively participate in your own mythology. It gives you the courage to face your dragons, the wisdom to recognize your allies, and the clarity to understand that every crisis, every challenge, is not a mistake or a punishment, but an essential part of the script that is shaping you into the hero you were born to be.